All right. It looks like everyone is in. Okay. My name is Liz Walworth. I'm the Stewardship Director at York Land Trust. And welcome to our Rethinking Gardening event. This is hosted in partnership between York Land Trust and the York Public Library. To get us started, I'm going to introduce the Wild Seed Project. They're an organization that builds awareness of the vital importance of native plants, provides all people with tools to restore biodiversity in their own communities. They equipped community members and public officials and municipalities and landholding individuals and organizations, from farmers to land trusts, with skills and resources they need to collectively repopulate landscapes with native plants that expand wildlife habitat, support biodiversity, and build climate resilience. To get us started, we're going to have Andrea Berry presenting. She joined Wild Seed Project as their executive director in 2021. She also serves on the board of directors at Momentum Conservation and Resources for Organizing and Social Change. Andrea was elected to the select board for the town of North Yarmouth, Maine in 2022, where she was leading community-driven efforts around land conservation and environmental stewardship. Take it away, Andrea.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz, and thanks to the library and the Land Trust for inviting me to speak today. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to jump in. So we're going to talk today about rethinking gardening and changing our perspectives on the landscape and the way that we interact with it. But before we do that, I want us to start off with a land acknowledgement. We feel like it is critical as an organization and as all people here living in the state of Maine and across our country to acknowledge the land that was stolen, the land that we are currently living on, and the knowledge and where that knowledge comes from. So as we begin this program that will engage us in planting seeds of place, we want to recognize that the land that we're leading this program from, that we at Wild Seed Project and those of you participating in this conversation are tied to in many ways, is the ancestral Wabanaki territory that we now call Maine. Wild Seed Project recognizes the inherent sovereignty of the tribes of the Wabanaki Confederacy, the people of the Dawn. The Abenaki, Fulton Band of Maliseet Indians, Mi'kmaq Nation, Penobscot Nation, and Passamaquoddy Tribe. And we honor their relationship to the plants, animals, and other beings that have been threatened and displaced through settler colonialism. We encourage you all of you who are here today and listening, and those of you who watch this as a recording later, to learn more about the historical and present-day relationships of Indigenous peoples to the place where you live. The purpose of this acknowledgement is to allow this knowledge to shape our work. Our work is dependent on understanding and reckoning with the history and the present-day violence of colonization. The exploitative practices of colonialism are directly responsible for the displacement of these important native plants that form the foundation of our local food webs. And from this understanding, we need to ask ourselves, what does it mean to build and rebuild reciprocal relationships with people, with plants, fungi, animals, soil, water, air? Re-establishing resilient ecosystems in which all forms of life can thrive is an important action to deconstructing our colonial legacy. And we've gathered here today to learn more about reestablishing native plant life, and I hope that you can let the knowledge of the roots and the breadth of this legacy of displacement guide us as we do that work. I also want to recognize that while I am here leading this program and sharing these resources, that these skills and information did not start, nor will it end with me. We're sharing a collection of teachings from so many teachers, both human and non-human. And at Wild Seed Project, we know that the best way to learn how to sow seeds is to watch plants sow those seeds and to try and replicate that process as best we can. So today I send my gratitude to all of our teachers as we jump into this conversation. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to start with a land and a knowledge acknowledgement. And One of the important things that I'll talk about today is this connection that we have with place and with plants and with the people who have stewarded this land for millennia. And I'm just very honored to be able to be here and to share the knowledge that I have learned, and to share that and pass that on to all of you. So who am I? My name is Andrea Berry. I'm the executive director of Wild Seed Project, and I've been in this role for almost 3 years, which is wild to me. And I sit at the organization from a level where I'm really looking at the questions around climate change and building climate resiliency, and I spend most of my time identifying other community members and other partners who we can work together with to spread this knowledge about building climate resilient landscapes. And so I'm really appreciative of York Land Trust and of the York Public Library for inviting me here. So how did I get to this position? Well, this is me and my daughter Cora, who just recently turned 15. And, I've been working in the nonprofit world for much of my career. And from the very early on in Cora's life, she watched me work in education equity and racial justice work. But throughout all of that, for her, the thing that she was the most scared of and the most worried about has always been climate change, all the way to the point where she would wake up with nightmares as a little kid. And, I would say, oh my gosh, monsters under the bed or something in the closet, whatever could it be? And it was the way that our planet is changing and the climate is changing and what she was inheriting. And for me, it made me reflect and think about where did I want to be? What did I need to be doing in order to help my kid, who's the center of my world, to feel better about this world that she is inheriting? So this is a picture of my backyard. We spent a lot of time gardening, and I can tell you, before I started at Wild Seed Project, Cora probably spent a total of 30 minutes her whole life in the garden with me. Gardening, definitely not her thing. But when I joined Wild Seed Project and we started talking about the way that what we put in the ground, what we plant and how we tend it can actually build resilience for this changing climate that we're experiencing, it changed for her. And she started not just getting involved with me in the garden, but getting involved and bringing her friends into the conversation as well, and really volunteering. And when I asked her recently, why the change? What keeps you doing this? And the biggest thing that she said was, it gives me a little bit of hope. It makes me think that even though there's this huge, scary thing that is weighing down at me, I know I can do something that makes a difference. It might be a small difference for something in our yard, for the ecosystem right where we live, but her actions are really making an impact. And that building of agency through literally the smallest act of planting seeds is something that I'm really excited to share with you today. So I want to back up and talk just briefly about Wild Seed Project. We're a nonprofit based in Maine, and this is actually our 10th anniversary year. And we do our work in 3 main ways. We manage a massive collection of native seeds from well over 100 different species of native plants to Maine. And we do what we call seed stewardship. We hand collect seeds from the wild in ethical and appropriate ways. And then we store, clean, dry, process those seeds and make them available through a seed sale as well as through seed donations. And we sell approximately 40,000 seed packets every year. So millions and millions of seeds that we're distributing all throughout the East Coast and throughout our ecoregions. And then we do things like what we're doing right now. We spend a lot of our time talking to people, because it's one thing to give someone a packet of seeds, but it's a totally different thing to talk to them about why that's important to get those seeds in the ground. So we do adult education programs, and I encourage all of you, if you're local to Southern Maine, to join us for hands-on workshops that we do all fall, teaching people how to sow native seeds. And we also do an increasing amount of educational programs with schools. And so we work in really intensive ways with schools to build school gardens so that kids are experiencing nature and pollinators and all the beauty that comes with plants, where they're learning and don't have that connection with nature as some place where you have to go to access. And then the last thing that we do, or the third part of our three-legged stool, which I guess isn't a very stable stool, but we'll leave that metaphor on the side, our building of community seed gardens. So it's one thing for us to collect seeds and to make those seeds available, and we could collect and make seeds available and have that be all of our full-time jobs, and it still wouldn't be getting enough seeds out there to really make the landscape level change that we need. And so one of the things that we prioritize is getting gardens into spaces where the public can access them. And whether that's at school gardens, library gardens, this is actually outside of L.L. Bean up in Freeport. That's what those canoes are, in spaces where people can access that seed and collect some seed for themselves and to start their very own gardens in their spaces. So what we're here to talk about today is actually how plants can help us to respond to the way that our climate is changing. And we know our climate is changing very, very rapidly. The image on the right here is the shifting of our agricultural zones. Many of us down in Southern Maine, if we are vegetable gardeners, know that we have shifted from zone 5B to zone 6, which is actually a massive difference, a 5-degree change in the average growing temperature, which is making that triggered shift. And as we progress through the decades of this century, we're going to see those zones get warmer and warmer and warmer, even for us down here in Southern Maine, but the northern part of the United States. The map here on the other side of your screen is a predictive model of what our climate will be like over the next decades, depending on a high emissions or a low emissions scenario. So even if we're able to get our emissions under real control and we go under that lower scenario, the environment that we are going to experience when my daughter is my age is going to be much closer to the environment of the mid-Atlantic than we experience up here on the Northeast. Things are changing. They're changing really, really rapidly. And we know that the landscapes are going to change with them. And so the forests that we are used to here in Maine, these maple beech birch forests, the spruce fir forests, we're going to see those shift and change to oak pine and oak hickory forests. We're going to see this massive change in, we are the pine tree state, and this shift in what our forests make up. And a big reason why I think a lot of us live and love living in this state. That is all changing, and it is part of our responsibility to figure out how do we respond to that. We're all experiencing extreme weather. I don't need to belabor it. This is actually a picture of a park down the road from my house that borders the Royal River. This is a beautiful park with picnic tables and a space to go fishing. And this is a picture from just a few weeks ago during one of our most recent large storms, where the park is under multiple feet of water. You can see the sign in the background there and the water line on the trees. This is after things have gone down almost a foot. And this is, I think, the 4th or 5th time that the river has overflowed its banks in 2024. We are seeing massive impacts of extreme weather, whether it's through flooding or through the large wind storms that we're having increasingly so, where we're seeing literally the trees coming down around us. This was Wild Seed Project's greenhouse in December of 2022, when we had a very large windstorm in the end of the year, and it just completely destroyed our structures. We need to be thinking about how we're going to navigate all of these different weather conditions that we're experiencing. And I'll tell you, the secret is that what we plant can actually help us to figure that out. So we need to make a change. And we know, I want to be really clear, we are not going to garden our way out of the climate crisis. That is not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that what we put in the ground, what we plant, how we plant it, and how we think about those plants actually matters, and it will make a difference. So how are we going to do that? What do we need to do? We need to plant native plants grown from seed, and we need to do it together as a community. So I'm going to run through each of these and make my case, and we'll see what you think at the end. So we need native plants. What do I mean by native plants? The definition we use at Wild Seed Project is plants that grew here, typically prior to European colonization, and has co-evolved over millennia with the region's animals, insects, amphibians, bacteria, and fungi. That co-evolution is really the critical piece, because native plants are going to help us to build healthy and resilient ecosystems. They're going to form the foundation, the scaffolding of that ecosystem. And it is because they have evolved with the animals and all of the other creatures that exist in our landscapes that they can make that happen, that they can be that structure. However, it is a little more nuanced than that. So even in that definition of what a native plant is, we're centering European colonization, right? You can see it right there, typically connected to European colonization. One of the things that we constantly need to be doing, and Wild Seed Project is working actively on this, is thinking about our language. We're questioning the use of everything from the term native to the term wild, and really everything in between. And so as responsible stewards of plants, as people in relationship with the ecosystem and living on this land, it is really important for us to think about what language are we using? Who is deciding what language we're using? Whose names are we prioritizing? And what are the biases that are seeping into our language, whether we intend for it to or not? And the thing that we always come back to is that it is our responsibility to follow the lead of Indigenous people. And Wild Seed Project is doing that very actively. We are working with Know Your Land Consulting out of Bangor, Kathy Pollard and her daughter Ann Pollard-Ranco, to explore all of these different questions about language. And we're rolling that out with kids. And so that is a really important piece to how we're thinking about this. And you're going to hear me use a bunch of different language throughout this presentation because we're still learning and evolving. So we're really here talking about native plants, and they do so much in our environments. They play massive roles in building balanced ecosystems. They support pollinators, which is one of the things we all know, plant the milkweed and the monarch butterflies will come. But they also help us with erosion control. They create all different types of habitat. They clean our water. They absorb water from the runoff and the rains that we're having. They grow food. There are some amazing native plants that are also edible. Everything from hazelnuts to elderberries to beach plums and so much more. And they help us to sequester carbon and to manage the emissions that we're putting out. So they do so many things, and they're often, a quiet small thing, but it's such a powerful opportunity for us to be thinking about our landscapes. If we can prioritize native plants, we can make a huge impact on all of these different things. So we need native plants to help to build that balanced ecosystem. And one of the things that Wild Seed Project feels really strongly about is that we need those plants to be grown from seed. Seeds create diversity. Every single seed is a different genetic makeup. So it might be the same species, but each seed is going to carry its own adaptations and its own creative makeup. And so every plant that's grown from each one of those seeds is going to be a little bit different. And that is critical for us to be able to respond to everything that's happening. So I'm going to offer you a little quick game here before we move on. So these are seeds from 12 different native plants. And I'm going to challenge you all. Why don't you take a second, and if you recognize anything, why don't you type it into the chat, and we'll see. I'll move to the next slide in a second, and we'll see who got what. So yeah, what are these beautiful, beautiful things? So much of what Wild Seed Project does is use art to convey these messages about the beauty of native plants. It's part of our strategy to break down the, oh, we don't want weeds in our yard. Those are just, scrappy. They're not beautiful. Art helps to demonstrate just the beauty and the dynamicism of all of these different species. All right, so let's see. Did you get anything right? There are such variety in the way that native plants replicate and procreate and travel and move through our ecosystems. Individual species are so diverse from each other, and with the beauty of seeds, each individual plant within a species has its own unique ability. And that's a really important piece of the context of this movement. Because when we go to mostly the big box store nurseries, so there are amazing native plant nurseries, and that is not who I'm talking about. But the big box stores, the big industrial nurseries, those plants that they're selling, they're not usually grown from seed. Almost every nursery plant that you're buying, they look identical to the others because they are actually clones. They are exactly genetically identical. And they've been brought up that way intentionally so that they have all the exact same colors. So they have the same form or shift, and the flowers look exactly the right way. All of that is for our benefit. But what it's actually doing is cutting out so much of the dynamic beauty of plants. Our founder, Heather McCargo, often talks about this whole genetic modification of plants as creating plants that only serve our own needs and having big, beautiful blooms. Almost every case, those big, beautiful blooms that you're seeing at big nurseries, she would describe those as sexually dysfunctional flowers and plants. They've been bred for our own love and beauty, and they've been bred to such a degree that they actually cannot reproduce. So there is no hybridization. And that's really strategic, because when we're only creating plants that we want to know exactly what's going to happen to them in the ground, that they're not going to have their own dynamic view and way of being, then we want to prioritize something that can't reproduce. But when it can't reproduce, it can't spread, it can't expand, and we're really cutting out so much of the opportunity that we get with native plants. Instead, we need to think about seed-grown plants as building genetic diversity. When we build genetic diversity, we build potential for climate resilience. Maybe one version of a plant is going to be able to tolerate some of the drier summers, like the drought we had 2 years ago. And some might be able to handle a longer winter or a shorter winter, or some might have different colors that will attract some of the pollinators that are coming up now earlier and at weird times, and they might be ready for them. Some of them might have stalks that aren't going to be as susceptible to breaking in the high winds. I know I've got some aspens, and some of them went completely over in the last storm, and some of them are still standing straight up. Same height, same connection, and maybe aspens aren't the great example because they're actually all colonies and connected to each other. But even so many of our trees and plants, some of them survived and some of them didn't. And a lot of that has to do with the genetic diversity that we're able to build when we let them grow in the way that they are meant to grow, from seed. So we want native plants. We want native plants that are grown from seed, and we want to do it with our community. When we do this together, it means not just my little backyard that has a haven for bumblebees and butterflies, but everyone's. So what does it mean to support a shared landscape? How do we think about the shifting and the changing of our environment and our role within it? Well, I'll go back to my beginning, which is just a reminder that it's critical that we center Indigenous voices and traditional Indigenous ecological knowledge in our process and in the way that we think about our landscapes. If we do that, we can remember that community and culture are going to help us to respond to this changing climate. And Deandra Esparza, who wrote a guest piece in our newest publication at Wild Seed Project, writes that only culture can weave fortitude and moral imperative into the fabric of society, and therefore climate resilience. When we change our culture, when we start to think about plants differently and about the landscape differently, that's when we're going to be able to build a strong climate response. If we can build conservation, ethic, and connection to nature together, we can do this all as a collected and connected community. We know that small things, if we all do small things, they can make a really big difference. But all right, so I've given you the case. So now what can we actually do? Well, the first thing is we need to push ourselves to change our definition of beauty. And that's a really, really hard thing to do. But that means not prioritizing pristine lawns and not prioritizing unnibbled leaves and sexually dysfunctional flowers, and allowing some of the leaves to stay on the ground, because we're changing beauty. It's not just for us, it's for the entire ecosystem. And when we shift who things are for, then we shift how we treat that landscape and how we manage those plants. We need to decenter ourselves and our priorities. It doesn't mean take that away. We still can have gardens because we think gardens are beautiful. Absolutely. But we also need to remember that gardens are not just for us. Those plants are critical for the entire life cycle of the number of insects. They're critical for hosting caterpillars that birds then feed to their young. There are so many different pieces to our landscape and to our ecosystem that if we can pull ourselves out of the center and put ourselves as one of many who can benefit from a garden or from the landscape, then we can really push ourselves to be different and to act differently, and to put our landscape practices back into balance, where yes, the decorative value can be important and is important. I have my grandfather's bearded irises that I moved from his home in New York when he passed away and brought up to Maine. And they are not really doing anything for the ecosystem, but they do a lot for me and my emotion and my joy. And I can have those, and I need to balance that with the benefit for the animals, for our watershed, for managing the weather, for wildlife, all of those things. How we get ourselves back into balance is really the critical question. Anne Pollard-Ranco, who we've been working really closely with around language, also wrote a guest piece in our newest guide, and she reminds us that our actions have ripples, and challenges us to think about the ways that we can make a positive impact through the creation of habitat for all our relations. And if we can remember that we are part of a big family of all of the different creatures that exist in this world, then we shift the way that we act and the way that we are. We can change how we respond to the environment instead of bending the environment to meet our wants and needs. So this is one of my favorite things. And this meme goes around that has, this guy from the 18th century dressed like that. That is not, I don't know, that's not how I'm dressed right now. And that reminds us that we don't need lawns. So lawns are actually a relic from the 18th century that were meant to show class and privilege because they were completely useless spaces, and that you were only able to maintain a big expanse of lawn because You had enough money and you had enough people working for you that you didn't need to farm it. You didn't need to have it be land that provided food for animals. You didn't need it to do any of those things. It could just be nice to look at. And if we can break ourselves out of this cult of worship of the lawn, we can make so much of a difference. Lawns are absolutely a thing of the past, and at least lawns that are full of turf grass. So this picture on the left here, I wish I had an image of somebody standing among those pathways. It's one of our Wild Seed Project members up in the Rockland area. And those are Joe Pyeweed and New York ironweed and a whole bunch of other things. And those plants are like 8 feet tall. And this woman moved into this house and she decided she didn't need the big wet grass lawn in the back of her house, and instead that her grandchildren would love it if they had this maze of beautiful plants to run and play in. The picture on the right is actually bluets or Quaker ladies from my lawn. So I do have some lawn. My daughter's a soccer player, and the inside of my house would be broken into pieces if I didn't have a space for her to kick the soccer ball outside. And so we do have a space of lawn, but we let so many different things grow in it. It's not monoculture. It's not uniform. The biggest question is, all right, so you want some lawn. How much lawn is the right amount for you? What do you actually need? And I'll tell you, it's not actually that much. We need to think about all the different benefits of those outdoor spaces. And if we only focus on lawn, we recognize that we're creating a landscape only for us. And it's not only for us, it's just a status symbol. It's something that's meant to show people that we don't need it to do anything. We don't need it to be part of our ecosystems. We don't need it to grow food, to bring other people joy. We don't need any of that. And that's not how we create balanced ecosystems. And that's not how we build resilience in the face of this changing climate. Turf grass is the #1 agricultural crop in the United States. We need to shift away from that. And it uses so much water, and the chemicals that get poured into it, and the management and the exhaust that comes from gas-powered lawnmowers and leaf blowing and all of those things. Our lawns and our commitment to the lawn is truly killing our planet. So what can we do? I focus on lawns because it is the easiest thing for all of us to do. We get to stop doing things. Just let it go, right? We're approaching No Mow May, so let's do No Mow May, and then we'll just continue along. So in May, let it go. See what's there. I take those reflector stakes that I put around my driveway, and when I see things growing in my lawn that I've let go, I stick a reflector stake there. And so if I am going to go and mow, I know what to mow around. I'm giving myself those cues, and I get to check in and see, oh my gosh, look, there's a black-eyed coneflower growing over there. Oh my gosh, there's some yarrow growing over here. And there's so much life sitting in the seed bank underneath the lawn that if you just let it grow, you'll see so much stuff. You can let it go and edit around it. And you can start to approach things, whether it's, slowly hemming in your lawn. So this is an example of sheet mulching, which we'll show you in a second, where you can lay down cardboard and then put 3 to 6 inches of mulch on top of it, a nice decomposed bark mulch. Leave it for a few months, and then you can plant directly into it. We can create more garden spaces without having to dig sod, which is pretty awesome. If we have less lawn, we have to do less things. We don't need to blow the leaves because the leaves will kill the lawn. That's fine. We want to kill the lawn. So leave your leaves. And when you leave your leaves, there's so much benefit that comes from that. There's the shelter for all different creatures who use that for winter protection, whether it's salamanders underneath the leaves or these beautiful cecropia moths or bumblebees that live down there. So many creatures spend so much of their life underneath that leaf litter that if you get rid of it, you lose all of that habitat. And then you don't have to leaf blow or rake, which is awesome. If you leave also the standing stems, you don't have to put your garden to bed. You can leave those things and they actually create homes for nesting bees and other types of creatures that use, this is a elderberry stem, and use those pithy stems to access little homes for themselves over the winter, or to lay eggs inside of them. You also do not have to send all of the sticks that came down from these storms to the brush dump. You can collect them in little nice looking piles, or you can just leave them where they fell and leave them for decomposers and insects and other creatures. Birds love piles of sticks. You want to see more birds? Give them some good sticks and some other things to decompose, to find food in, and to find shelter in and protection. Excuse me. And leave your dead trees. So if a tree broke during the storm, that's okay. You don't have to take it all the way down to the ground. If you want to take it somewhere, cut it and leave it fairly high so that you can have home for other types of creatures. You'll see more woodpeckers. You might see owls. You'll see all different types of creatures who find those snags, as they're called, and make homes there. Now, getting rid of your lawn is the first thing. Leaving all of those different things that we might call lawn trash, or, all of that different litter. You don't have to do anything. You can leave that right there. And then the next step is to pay attention when you stop doing the things to what actually happens. Find out what's already growing. What trees do you have? What's going to grow up when you leave the lawn alone? What's growing along the edge of your property, along the edge of the woods, along the edge of your driveway, popping out in the cracks? What are those things? And if you can pay attention to what's already growing, that gives you so many clues. It tells you how wet is the soil. You can see what's growing and learn about what's underneath the ground. You can pay attention to what the light level is, and understanding what's happening means that you can then make planting choices that are matching the conditions that you have. Again, remember, we don't want to bend the ecosystem to match what we want. If we respond to what the ecosystem has and is providing, we can have so much more success. If you plant a plant that really, really wants wet soil, but you plant it in really sandy soil, it's going to struggle and you're going to have to do a ton of work. If you plant something that loves wet in a place that's wet, so much easier. So you remember that park that I showed you that was completely underwater? These are the plants that are growing there. And I can't wait to see what pops up this year. The white turtlehead, the jewelweed, the Joe Pye weed, plants that love those wet conditions are growing up along that space. And they're the ones that are going to be able to handle the flooding that they have experienced again and again and again. If I had a really dry loving plant that I was forcing to be planted into that park, it's not going to make it through what it's experiencing because of our changing climate and because of these extreme weather events. We can also plant for real conditions, not just in those more wild spaces, but in the managed spaces that we have. This picture on the left here of the goldenrod and the blue-eyed grass, that's from the edge of my driveway. It's really terrible soil, it's hot over there, and there's a lot of salt from the road being plowed onto it. And those plants are really happy there. And other things I've tried to plant in the past, they're like, yeah, not there. Thanks, though. And if I can allow the things that are happy to spread and to expand, I'm creating a healthier habitat. Pay attention to the sun. This picture in the middle here is of a alternate leaved or pagoda dogwood that really likes shade. So plant shadier things on the shadier side of your house. Don't force them into something that isn't going to work for them. And even if you don't have space to garden, you can put native plants and create healthy ecosystems in pots. So pay attention to what your conditions are. And if you don't have anything, you can still put something out on a stoop or in a window box. Anything is possible. Plant for your real conditions and plant for pollinators. The beauty is all native plants are pollinator plants. So you don't have to go to a fancy special list. You can find pollinators being attracted to collections of native plants anywhere. So many of these are from home gardens. In fact, the purple plant is a New England aster, and that's a bumblebee from my yard. The black-eyed coneflower is one of those that popped up in my lawn that I just left there. That happy crab spider is sneaking up on that honeybee. The goldenrod picture is also from my driveway, always crawling with different insects. If you plant them, they will come. And you want to plant for a full ecosystem. So take the opportunity and don't just plant flowers only. Plant flowers and herbaceous plants, then plant shrubs, and that's how you're going to get some really wonderful nests of birds. And don't forget to plant trees too. We need to plant all levels of the ecosystem. Ecosystems don't exist only on the bottom or only on the top. And so that is the next piece that we need to really be thinking about. All right. We've let our lawn go. We've put in some plants into our gardens. Let's make sure that we've got things that are lower to the ground, things that are in that middle level, in the shrub level, and then things that are higher up with the trees. And my pretty much final note for you is a reminder that if you're planting and you're planting for climate resilience and you're responding to the places where you're planting, then you don't need pesticides and non-organic fertilizers. If we move away from the lawn, then we don't need to be fertilizing our lawns, which are creating major issues in our water streams. If we change the way we think about beauty, and it's not just about the perfect pristine, then we don't need pesticides to keep those plants from getting eaten. We can make shifts, simple shifts in the way that we think about our landscape, and it frees us from so many of these things that we feel tied to, but are actually really harmful for the environment. So we need to anticipate our changes that are coming. We know that species are migrating earlier because of the warming weather. We're seeing flooding, we're seeing erosion, we're seeing extreme weather. It's our responsibility not just to plant for the light levels and the moisture levels. We need to be planting for long-term resilience. So be thinking about what are plants that are going to be drought tolerant. When you're planting something along a place that you know has flooded a whole lot this year, can you plant things that are going to help with flooding, that are going to be able to handle that being, really wet feet for a long time? As we're getting icier, we're going to see more salt. So what can you plant along the edges of your driveways and the edges of roads that are going to help to be able to manage that salt and to be the buffer for the rest of the ecosystem that will get damaged by it? What can you plant that's going to help with erosion control? If we start to think about not just the environment that we have, but the environment that's coming, we can make a huge difference in helping to, again, we're not going to stop climate change, but we can build climate resilience through our actions. Resilience is rooted in diversity. It's rooted in healthy, balanced ecosystems, and we can play a part in that, or we can play a part to work against that, and that's really our choice. So I invite you to remember that a more vibrant and habitable world is possible and that we can build it one seed at a time. So thank you. I'm really excited to answer any of your questions and to dive in. But first, I'm going to pass things over to Liz after I leave you with a reminder that next week, our Planting for Climate Resilience guide for this year is going to be open and available for the public. So I encourage you to visit our website, wildseedproject.net, to snag up your copy today, or I guess not today, next week, and join us and consider being part of the Wild Seed Project community. So thanks so much.
Thank you for that amazing presentation. You, by the way, received a lot of love in the comments about that illustrated seed activity where people name seeds. We had a lot of correct answers in there. I am going to share my screen. And, oh, Let me enter presentation mode here. Oh. Alrighty. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit to being a local advocate for native plants and about invasive species mitigation. Again, my name is Liz Walworth. I'm the Stewardship Director at York Land Trust. York Land Trust is a small town land trust that's conserved over 3,500 acres of land. Because our land is typically pretty undisturbed by the time it gets to us, our main concern is addressing invasive plants so our native plants can thrive. So you may see some of this content geared towards addressing invasive plants, but we're all here for these natives. And as a town land trust, we consider almost everyone in York our neighbor. So I'm excited to share some tips in communicating with other people in your neighborhood to get them excited and involved. First, I want to touch on some local challenges, and even if you're coming from outside of Maine or outside of our county, you might see some things that you can relate to here. The United States this past year has seen its highest rate of landowner turnover ever in the United States. That's caused a lot of changes to land use and land management. We're also seeing a lot more development, habitat fragmentation, disturbances, moving of materials, which can introduce, well, all of these things can introduce new threats in terms of invasive species to our area. We also have a lot of valuable and sensitive habitat and species in this area. And our location abutting New Hampshire and very close to northeastern Massachusetts also makes us very vulnerable. We're typically one of the first counties in Maine to receive new invasive species that are becoming more and more acclimated to our harsh winters. And at the same time, our winters are becoming less harsh. So those are some things we're dealing with. A great place to start, which Andrea focused her presentation on, is starting in your own garden. It's fantastic to get engaged, learn from your experiences, learn the challenges and rewards in the process and the planning, and really build yourself up as both, your own land manager and a resource for others in your community. If you have a front lawn or any place where you can demonstrate what you're doing, it's a great way to be an example to other people in your neighborhood. Another really important piece of being an advocate is being informed. So Maine's advisory list of invasive plants is getting updated this year. They're adding over 100 new invasive species to this list, I believe. So just being aware of what we're concerned about in our state. UNH and UMaine Extension are also fantastic resources, and they may be able to build off of some of the resources that Wild Seed Project offers in terms of what plants can I plant that are edible. I'm trying to establish an herb garden. I'm concerned about the soils I have. They have a little bit of everything, and fantastic resources. The Maine Natural Areas Program, or whatever state you might be coming from, has fantastic resources about controlling invasive plants. There's all sorts of free webinars and events popping up that people are just so excited to share and educate others on. And then I personally love the Facebook groups, and you can find those for your town, you can find those for your state, for your region, and you can find national groups that are doing really exciting things. That meme that Andrea shared of the gentleman in the fancy wig on the lawn, I first saw in Pollinator Friendly Yards, which is a national pollinator friendly landscaping group on Facebook. So as part of our work with the Land Trust, sometimes we have to speak to our neighbors about invasive plant issues that go over our property lines and may be shared with a neighbor. And this is something that other people might relate to. Some of you might not be the kind of person to go up and speak to a neighbor about what's going on their land, and other people feel more comfortable having those conversations. But I always like to start with acknowledging relationships with land can be very personal, and that includes with our garden. Andrea mentioned that very sentimental connection to the irises that she transported. I always go into it as telling myself the story that someone has inherited this garden from someone who loved it and loved them and has passed away. It's great to assume that there is some kind of connection. And you meet your neighbors where they're at. It's wonderful to start by inviting people in, welcoming them, informing them, and certainly not from a place of blame or judgment. If they seem interested and open to dialogue, it's wonderful to offer support and your knowledge, things that you've learned from managing your own property and doing your own research. And not all solutions you come to might be black and white. They might not redesign their whole yard to be a native plant haven. And they might even want to keep some of the invasive plants on their land. But maybe there's a solution where the flowers can be cut before they go to seed and they fill their house in the summer with beautiful bouquets. You know, there are a myriad of solutions that can be figured out if you can meet people where they're at. Something that really helps us out as big landowners, whether you're looking at public lands or at land trusts, is noting when you see an invasive species or when you see a species that's native and very important and worth protecting. We have a lot of threatened species that are still thriving in certain areas in Maine, and we want to know where they are so that we can be aware in our management decisions. And we also want to keep an eye on our nurseries. A lot of nurseries are trying their best to keep up with our restricted list of invasive plants. But if you see anything that doesn't seem like it should be there, you think it might be on the restricted list, it's really great to note that and mention it to someone at the state. And I know it can be a little bit scary to reach out to these larger organizations, but please don't be afraid to reach out because it's really helpful for us to get more eyes out on the ground. This is an example from one of those Facebook groups that I mentioned of someone who identified at a Biddeford market basket, someone selling, or market basket selling Euonymus emerald gold, which is a very invasive, very aggressive plant on our landscape. And if they had not caught it, who knows, they might have sold it for years. They might have reordered. And this would have established a whole continuing issue in the area. But they were able to not only educate the supermarket because they had done their own research, but they also called in Gary Fish, our Maine state horticulturalist, and they were able to make sure that that issue got resolved and the supermarket got the resources that they needed. Another wonderful way to get involved and get learning is supporting local efforts in public spaces. Coming up at our land trust, for example, we have our native plant sale on the 11th of May. We have many invasive species work days, especially in the spring. But coming up, we have another climate series event with the library, doing an ID and pull day on May 4th. And these are fantastic educational opportunities because they allow us to focus on a couple plants, learn how to ID them in the fields, learn how to remove them, different options that may work for your land, and how to dispose of them appropriately so we're not reintroducing the issue to our own areas or to a neighbor's land. And if you're not in York, Maine, if you look at Nature Groupie or any other land trusts or conservation groups, many of them offer similar events, whether that's invasive species polls or interpretive walks that can show you the value of native plants on your landscape. And lastly, while you're doing this work, while you're exploring, one of the best things that you can do is connect with others in any way possible, whether that's inviting someone to your garden to see your success, or helping someone with their garden, or joining in on these bigger work days, or joining the Facebook groups or the conferences on these species so that everyone is learning and staying connected and benefiting from all of the progress that we're making and our individual experience. It's all so much more valuable when we can be connected. And it makes, especially when you think about municipal efforts and local efforts, it helps a lot with the longevity and the efficacy of our efforts, because we can't have it stand on a couple of really effective individuals. It's best when it's really ingrained into the fabric of our communities. And with that, I will close out our presentation here, and we'll move into questions and answers. And I'm going to turn off my screen share and read the chat. There we go. Alrighty. So does anyone have any questions? I know Deneen mentioned that she has about 500 seedlings of native plants grown that were provided by the Wild Seed Project, and sends her thanks from the middle school.
I just want to say I love that so much. And I sent a little comment that we'd love to have pictures, see pictures and hear stories. So any educators, please send Nell, our lead educator, stories. We'd love to highlight what you're doing and share it with other people.
Andrea, do you have any suggestions of shade-loving plants, or plants that like wet soil? I'm seeing those two come up.
Yes. So one of my so shade is not my expertise, I have to say. Here at my house, I have lots and lots of sun and really terrible super dry soil. So I'll give that caveat. But one of our favorite shade-loving trees is the pagoda or alternate leaf dogwood. It has a really beautiful form that has, it very much is kind of layers and then another layer and another layer of leaves coming out. It grows very, very quickly as well and can be a beautiful tree to add into any of your gardens. So if you have shady spaces, don't think that means you can't add more trees into that space. And trees is where I always try and start and then build out plants from there. Wild Seed Project has a really extensive list of information and plant species on our website. And you can, yes, thank you, Amelia. You can go visit the website and search for any different plants, and you'll be able to find kind of the perfect match for you, as well as our guides all have different plant communities together that are matched. Some are great for shade, some are great for riverside, some are great to help with erosion, all of those different types of things. So while I'm not an encyclopedic expert to share a whole list, really do head to our website, and you can look at our seed sale and search by shade and wet and get a whole list of different species from there. In terms of wetter soils, if you have sunny spaces, I love New York ironweed and Joe Pye weed, as well as blue vervain really loves water spaces. And all of those really pink and purple blooms are also just really beautiful and pulling lots of different pollinators, so can create really dynamic spaces in yards and gardens. But again, visit our website for long lists of species. We also, Wild Seed Project's a member organization, and each month for all of our members, anybody who'd like, we lead a Zoom question and answer session with our staff horticulturists. So they're there, and those are the perfect questions to float out there. And I know we have typically like 40 to 60 people who join, and it's a great way to build community, just like Liz was saying, with folks who may not be necessarily directly in your area, but who are really excited about native plants.
Really appreciate Alana's shout out in the comments for the UMaine UNH Pollinator Friendly Garden Certification Program. I think that's a wonderful place to get started as well.
Any other questions?
If not, it sounds like we're ending right on time. Oh, a couple more. Knotweed. Um, it's the tough one. I think the way that I've gone about it in the past, tackling smaller patches has been something called the lasagna method, which a lot of people might be familiar with. It's laying down layers of plastic sheeting so that things heat up and there's no room to breathe, cardboard. Some people use woven geotextiles, and just plopping garden beds over them and making sure you're stepping over all of this area and creating pressure so that the sprouts are snapping off every year. Frequent mowing also works great if you are persistent. I'd say at least 3 times a year. Andrea, do you have a favorite?
One of the things that we've seen, one of the very few things that we've seen be able to outcompete knotweed is the purple flowering raspberry, which is one of our native raspberries, has these really big leaves. And so it does raspberry things. It makes a bramble and a thicket, but then its leaves are so broad that it really, truly blocks out all of the sun. And you do have to really actively remove the knotweed first and get to, I mean, you're never going to get to a blank slate, but get as much of it out as you can. But then putting something that's also going to have the same type of suckering activity, spreading activity that the knotweed will, and that has really big abilities to block out that light is going to be helpful.
Um, hmm. Another question is, what is the best way to remove invasive grasses from a pond? I'm curious if they might mean Phragmites with that.
I mean, I think, yeah, the challenge with water-based plants is you can't like cover it in the same way that you can something like knotweed, where you can kind of cut it and mow it and push it down. Sometimes we see a lot of different types of biocontrols that can be put into lakes or ponds, but there's so much I don't know. There's a lot of questions for me around how we disrupt an ecosystem even more by putting in a species that can specifically target some of those plants that we don't want to see. So it's a tough one. I would say Gary Fish, who's our state horticulturist, is an amazing resource on all things invasive plants in Maine. And I did drop in some information about Maine State information on jumping worms, and the same website will be really effective for addressing any types of invasive species that you're battling.
Wonderful. From what I can recall from Phragmites removal, being really extensive about digging out the roots is the main way to go. Or if you have a way to drain that pond temporarily, and have access to a professional, I know some folks have gone the burning route of setting it on fire. Although, again, maybe have a professional handle that one.
Yeah, a lot of these, the invasive plants that we're dealing with, as well as some of the invasive, insects, the invasive pests that we're experiencing, being realistic about what you can accomplish for me, is one of the most important strategies. So you could spend every single day trying to eradicate these plants from the spaces where you are prioritizing. And they'll still come back in a lot of ways. So instead of taking like massive spaces and trying to get rid of everything, picking out one that you really want to focus on and systematically work to remove it, or pick out one space, as Liz had mentioned, and systematically work to clean that space and to change that ecosystem back into balance, are going to be some of the ways that you can do this for the long haul. Because you might get rid of everything on the property where you're working, and then next door have somebody who's not doing the same thing and have that crawl back in. And so finding something that's going to allow you to have a little bit of to put in the energy, but not to feel so sad as it continues to come back year after year. Additionally, making sure that you're replacing instead of just eradicating. If you just go and cut things and cut things and cut things and you don't put something else in its place, in a lot of cases, it may even make it worse. And so making sure that when you're cutting plants, when you're removing plants, that you're being thoughtful about what kind of plants you're going to plant in replacement is an important step that people often forget.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no replacement for prioritizing what your work is, especially if you're working on a really big piece of land, thinking about what resources or what areas are the most important to you or the most sensitive really helps.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think that's it for our questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to come and speak with your community. This has been wonderful. Y'all are pretty amazing down in New York, and I'm really glad to have a little part in it. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.